When you hear the word oligarch, your mind probably jumps to other countries, right? But what happens when that kind of immense wealth starts to shape power right here at home? Well, today we're going to unravel a story about how money, family, and politics can get all tangled up, not just for a little while, but for generations. So let's get right into it. And we're not starting with some dry textbook definition. Nope, we're starting with a story. A story that journalist Andrea Bernstein puts perfectly. She calls it a multi-generational saga, a book about the marriage of money and power. And that phrase, that idea, really helps you understand how personal fortunes and political clout can basically become the same thing. All right, so our story actually kicks off at a wedding. Picture this. It's 2009. Ivanka Trump is marrying Jared Kushner. And, people who were there said it felt like more than just two people getting hitched. It was seen as, well, a strategic merger. That phrase again, a marriage of money and power. And yeah, this was no ordinary family party. It was a very, very carefully curated event. The guest list itself was basically a power move, a who's who of people who could be, let's say, useful to the family's business interests. It was all about bringing them into the fold, creating this powerful network built on favors and future opportunities. So you gotta ask, right? How do families even get that kind of influence to begin with? It definitely doesn't happen overnight. Turns out, it started decades earlier, with what you could call a family playbook, a really simple, repeatable formula for turning your connections into cold, hard contracts. And here is that playbook boiled down to 3 simple steps. It's a model that Fred Trump absolutely perfected back in the 1930s. Step 1, identify. He figured out who held the purse strings for federal housing loans in Brooklyn, which was the local political machine. Step 2, cultivate. He got in good with them, building close ties through donations and favors. And step 3, benefit. He ended up getting a huge slice of the pie, all these government-backed projects that really launched his empire. And this is the exact business model he passed down to his son, Donald. It's a perfect real-world setup for the bigger ideas we're about to get into. Okay, so this whole story of using political connections to get ahead financially, it's not just about one family, right? It makes you step back and look at the bigger picture, at the system itself. And, as it happens, political scientists have a name for a system where a tiny, wealthy group holds all the cards. That system is called an oligarchy. The word comes from the ancient Greek oligarchia, which literally means rule by few. And it's an old idea. The philosopher Aristotle was the first to really use the term, and he used it to describe a very specific, and to him, a very troubling form of government. See, for Aristotle, there was a huge difference between two types of rule. On one hand, you had aristocracy, which he saw as rule by the best, the most qualified people. But on the other hand, you had oligarchy, which he thought was a total corruption of that idea. It wasn't about who was the most capable, it was just about who had the deepest pockets. Okay, so fast forward to today. In a modern democracy, how does this actually work? How do the wealthiest people pull the levers of power? The thing is, they don't even have to hold office themselves. Researchers have actually pinpointed a few key ways they do it. Political scientists Page and Winters have laid out 4 big ones. They argue that concentrated wealth is basically a system that works to defend itself. And you can see how this works. Things like lobbying to shape policy or making campaign contributions to influence elections. I mean, just think back to that Fred Trump playbook. That's a perfect example of this in action. But it also includes things like shaping public opinion, controlling the narrative, and even influencing who gets to be a judge, which literally shapes the rules of the game for everyone. And look, this isn't just an American story or just one family story. Not at all. Scholars use this term, oligarchy, to describe systems all over the world. You hear it used for Russia, for the Philippines. It's really a global concept. But the idea of it happening in the US isn't just some fringe academic theory either. In fact, back in 2015, former President Jimmy Carter said it pretty bluntly. He said the United States is an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. He was talking about a Supreme Court decision that opened the floodgates for money in politics, and he argued it was pushing the country in that direction. So this brings us to the core issue, the fundamental conflict. You have the interests of a wealthy few on one side, and the will of the Democratic majority on the other. So what happens when, say, most people want policies that spread wealth around a bit more, but those exact policies go against the interests of a small, super powerful group that has the money and influence to stop them? That's the real tension. And that's the big question we're left with, isn't it? Can democracy and oligarchy really coexist?
I mean, if a system allows a tiny group of people to have so much more power just because of their wealth, what does that actually mean for the whole idea of one person, one vote? What does it mean for the future of democracy itself?